Good morning, everyone. Welcome. Thank you so much for joining me today. My name's Tristan. I'm going to be your presenter for today's webinar. And just as our first slide suggests here, today we're going to be discussing some tips and tricks for facilitators using the Everything DiSC tool. Now, we've got 45 minutes together today and plenty to cover. So let's go ahead and dive into our agenda. This is what we're going to be looking at today. I wanted to focus on three high-level areas that are really important for us as facilitators. First, I want to have a look at building our learners' confidence in the tool. Then we're going to dive into a little bit more about how we can maintain our learners' engagement during the sessions, any pre-work and any follow-up tasks as well. And then finally, we'll have a look at how we can keep DiSC alive beyond your facilitated sessions, because that really is part of the art form. Not just delivering a great, engaging session, but having your learners carry that information, that learning beyond your workshop and really implement it in our day-to-day lives. Fingers crossed, after we cover those three high-level topics there, we'll also have some time for some questions about any of the topics discussed, or really any other questions about facilitating Everything DiSC that anyone may have and want to share as a group there. So fingers crossed we have some time for that one. If there are any questions or you just think of them later after today's webinar, of course, we'll give you an email address. You can go ahead and email those ones over. I'm more than happy to address any questions that do come up. Okay, without further ado, let's get stuck into our first high-level topic here. We're looking at building confidence in the Everything DiSC tool. So in a world with so many different tools, so many different profiles and programs, it's so important that when we are delivering Everything DiSC to our learners, we do as much as we can to support them so that they can feel confident in what they are doing and why they are doing it. So first of all, I want to look at some strategies that we can use to quell any anxiety surrounding the tool for their learners. This can often come up from misunderstanding of how the tool actually works, or even a poor experience in the past from another tool or another program that they've really sort of set the standard or set the bar to. And that will, of course, then translate into a bit of anxiety coming into using DiSC if it's the first time they're doing it. Then I want to speak briefly about the power of the supplemental report and why I always share it with my learners, despite some of the, I guess, nuanced part of there in terms of how it's actually designed to be used. I will always be sharing that with any of my learners that come to one of my sessions, and I'll explain a little bit more into details to why that is during today's call. Okay, let's start by flying into this topic here about quelling some anxiety that may be around the tool for your learners there. So ultimately, sometimes people are reluctant to take a personality assessment like Everything DiSC. As I said, they may have suffered from a misuse of an assessment in the past. They might have worries about privacy or concerns about how their information is used, or they may even just have some questions, some concerns about the validity or reliability of the assessment. I put together three suggestions to help quell some of those fears. And the first one that I can recommend is to simply share the facts about the assessment with your learners prior to taking that DiSC profile there. First off, always encourage you to emphasize that there's not going to be any judgments involved in this DiSC assessment. We're going to be exploring differences, yes, but they're not right, they're not wrong, they're just different. And this is going to help us explore some of those differences and what it means for our relationships. The second point to focus on is that there's not going to be any deep, dark secrets revealed as part of completing a DiSC assessment. Now, the DiSC tool is going to reflect observable behaviours, but by no means is it a mental health evaluation. Right? It doesn't go that deep. We're not looking to explore or diagnose anything as part of doing the DiSC assessment. It's simply not how it works. Following on this third one can often be a little bit of a hurdle for some learners to get over there. DiSC is not going to be a measure of job performance or aptitude. Right? So using a behavioural model, and it looks at things like assertiveness and sociability, but is certainly not a cognitive skills-based assessment. It's not going to reflect how well you do your job, nor will it tell you, you must be this particular style to be successful in a certain vocational field. Simply not how it works, but there is a bit of a misconception out there for some learners that maybe this is going to be reflected in their assessment results. And then finally, I always like to tie this last point in as well. that we are going to be so much more than just our DiSC styles. Right? We're all complex human beings. We all bring our own experiences to the table. And with those experiences also come strengths and challenges that we're all going to contribute in terms of our team and our workplace. Now, these are quite a few points to keep refreshing to your learners on a regular basis. So I find the easiest way to summarize this is to just come back to our cornerstone principles. And I've got them on the screen there for you. Now, these are included in every DiSC profile really early in terms of the report itself, and they are really important, if not the most important thing to keep in mind when using it. Right? So all DiSC styles and priorities are equally valuable, and everyone is a blend of all 4 styles. And sometimes that last part can get missed or lost in the weeds. We are all going to factor and show a blend of all 4 styles and characteristics. So it's important to keep that in mind when using the tool. And then secondly, of course, our work style is also influenced by so many other factors, life experiences, education, and maturity, all contributing to finally derive what our DiSC style is or what DiSC style we have. Now, it doesn't matter if I am facilitating a session for a group of new users, first time to the tool, or a group of seasoned Everything DiSC aficionados that use the tool on a regular basis. I always start my sessions and bring attention to our cornerstone principles, regardless of their experience, because it really frames the mindset so well about how we're going to be using the tool moving forward. That's the first strategy, sharing the facts. The second one is being comfortable sharing either a sample or your own profile. And the reason why I recommend that is it sets a really important standard about how this amazing tool can be used. So as it said, I always recommend sharing at least an example, if not your own, because it shows that DiSC data can and really should be shared. There's great value in sharing it. And as briefly touched on the previous slide, we're not looking to uncover, any deep or dark secrets in the profile. You should be willing to share and be very comfortable sharing this idea of what style you are. And ultimately, that's because this knowledge is designed to help the learner have more effective interactions. When I do receive a little bit of pushback or hesitancy about sharing DiSC data, I often pose this question to the learner. I use my example in that scenario. I say, why would I not want my teammates to know how I like to be communicating? Right? Why would I not want to share that information with them to say, this is how I like to approach certain scenarios or prefer to deliver communication? That's a really valuable thing for me to share with the people I work with, because it means that it's going to lead to more effective relationships and interactions throughout the workday. So I really encourage people to frame that. If there is some hesitancy, really show them the positive of sharing that DiSC data. Now, the good news is as well, there are samples available for every single DiSC product available throughout the entire suite. So for those of you that have access to an Epic account, amazing, you can download those samples as many times as you like through your Epic account, and it will also populate your contact details on the front page as well. So great for sharing that one with the clients or our external consultants, or even just personalizing that sample report for those that are using the tool internally. If you don't have access to your own Epic account, that's completely fine, not to worry. Samples are available for all of the products on the Integro website. So you can just go in there and download any examples or samples that you might need to share with your learners ahead of time. All right, and then my third strategy here to really put aside any anxiety or concerns about taking the assessment is to have that research ready to share. And what I mean by that is have access to the resources that shows how this tool was developed in your back pocket and have it ready to share with the learners that are interested in knowing a little bit more. Now, I will say that with the caveat that most learners are not going to go into that deep dive about the inner workings of how the tool works or how it was created. But sometimes just letting them know that that research is available can be enough to draw a little bit more confidence about the tool. Right? And it also means that you shouldn't take advantage of all the amazing resources that are available to you as facilitators. So Wiley has conducted extensive research and testing to confirm the robust scores for both validity and reliability of the Everything DiSC tool. And so you know and can be confident that by using Everything DiSC, you are delivering the most advanced and resonant DiSC tool that's available on the market. And those resources you can see there on your page. We've got research reports, both the theory and the adaptive testing component. And also for our Catalyst users, you of course have DiSCology. I've just put a few screenshots you can see there for what those resources look like. If you do want a copy of these resources, reach out. I'm more than happy to share that with you. In essence, we have on the left our adaptive testing research report, our theory and research report on the right. And of course, as mentioned, you have DiSCology available to those of you that have Catalyst. All right, moving on now, I want to speak about the value of sharing the supplemental report with your learners. Now, this one, it's an incredibly valuable tool that's really designed to help your learners understand a little bit more about their results. And traditionally, it's not always shared with the learner, and it's likely due to that extra level of complexity that's contained within the report. Right? It's more information for them to process. It's not immediately intuitive to read and understand on first glance what it's actually telling you. But having said that, it really contains some valuable information about their profile. The other component that's not helping this case for sharing with the learners is it is written in the name, right? Supplement for facilitators, not supplement for learners. But I personally feel really strongly about sharing those results with my learners because at the end of the day, the report is about them, right? It's about their own information. So why shouldn't they have access to it? The caveat that I share with them is that I always take 10 minutes out of my session to explain how to read and interpret the data, because it can sometimes feel a little bit overwhelming, especially if it's just placed in front of you, ready to read there on the desk. And this is how I do it. I'm going to show you very quickly how I do a high-level overview of explaining how to read this report so that you can then share that in your session with your learners and they can get the most out of this incredibly valuable report. So the report itself consists of 3 main parts. Part 1, our umbrella graph. You have here this big blue sort of shading blob, if you like. And what you have here on this screen is my umbrella graph on the left. And then on the right, we have an example or a screenshot of the DiSC map that I get from my profile. So you can think about this in terms of, if I get my laser pointer out, this one is accessible for all learners. That comes from the standard profile that they receive. Our umbrella graph is this first part of our supplemental report. What this shading indicates is we have 8 DiSC scales around the map. These are things like DIID, ISSI, and so on and so forth. When your learners complete their assessment, they are responding to prompts, and they are essentially saying how much they agree with a certain prompt or a statement using that Likert scale. 1, completely disagree, to 5, completely agree. What the shading represents is how much that person agreed with the prompts that are associated with that scale. So the more blue shading, the more that person responded in the positive to those particular prompts associated with each of the scales here. In my example, this is a bit like a push or a tug of war, if you like. My blue shading has pushed my dot and ultimately my style into that far right-hand side of the DiSC map, ultimately leading to my SI style. What I don't see, if I only have access to my profile, is this little spike here. This shows that I do actually align with quite a bit of the C scale, indicating that I do agree with certain prompts, usually affiliated with that C style. Without seeing this visual representation of the umbrella graph and only having access to my profile report and this map, that's not directly or explicitly covered in my profile or my style story. This is a great representation that then they can see that raw data being captured as well. So always keeping an eye out for spikes is what I tend to share with my learners there. Are there any spikes that may add more context to your profile that you're not directly seeing in your report? Moving on to part number 2, our unexpected items. The easy quote, or I guess throwaway prompt that I always share here is that these are unexpected for your style, but completely expected for you, because these are the raw data or the raw answers provided by your learners when they complete that assessment there. So you can see here, I've got my unexpected items on the screen, and we have some prompts here. These are the prompts that I responded to. So for instance, the first one, I tend to be questioning. We then have numbers towards the edge of these prompts, and this reflects what score I gave that prompt as part of the assessment. 4s and 5s, indicating agree and strongly agree. For those of you or your learners that have 1s and 2s, they reflect that strongly disagree or disagree component here. So again, we'll really emphasize here, unexpected for the style, completely expected for the learner. And this is how I get them to use that new information. I encourage them to reflect back on their profile story. And often as part of the sessions there, I get them to personalize it. Tick things they agree with, question mark things they're not sure about, crosses next to things they disagree with. When I give them access to this supplemental, I prompt them to go back to their style story and find any of those question marks or those X's, things they disagree with or were not really sure about. And I ask them, are there any unexpected items that appear in this report that add a little bit more context to why you disagreed or were unsure about that part of your profile? Here's a bit of an example that I use. This is an excerpt from my own style story here. It says, suppressing your frustration during tense moments may prove counterproductive, causing bitterness to simmer beneath the surface. I read that and I thought, doesn't sound like me at all. Big X on my profile there. When I came to my unexpected items, I find this prompt here. I am very outspoken with my opinions and a score of 4, indicating that I agree with the statement there. And that's a prime example of that additional context or nuance that this report provides. It shows the tool that it has captured this idea that I can be very outspoken with my opinions, which is not overtly clear if I'm only given access to my style story that I can see there as a prime example. What this does, it builds that additional level of confidence and context that says, yes, this tool is capturing the little nuances part of my profile by seeing this additional raw data. It just adds that a little bit more, as I said, nuance, a bit more context so the learner can appreciate what has actually been captured when they complete this assessment. Really valuable exercise as part of that debrief process. Coming through to our third and final part of the supplemental report, our priority subscales. So, most important thing to share with the learners here. These priority subscales, and again, very quickly, these relate to the words around the outside of the map here. These priority subscales are derived using a separate set of questions than the one that determines my dot placement or my DiSC style. Separate set of questions that are measured here. Now, the learner won't be aware that these are separated in 2 different sets of questions. They combine them and essentially do them all at once when they complete the assessment, but they are derived from these 2 different buckets, if you like, is the terminology we use, buckets of questions. So I am giving here the 3 priorities closest to my dot, which are enthusiasm, collaboration, and support. Everyone gets the 3 closest to their dot automatically. What this bar graph tells me is I just so happen to have actually answered those 3 priorities in the higher scoring as enthusiasm, collaboration, and support. You can see that data here. Now, all that tells me is that I've answered those priority questions within the statistical norm of the typical SI style candidate. That's not to say that it's better or worse to answer outside of those styles, because you can have an additional 4th or 5th priority. It simply means that that's just how I've answered those priority questions. Let me show you an example of someone with a very similar style, but that additional priority to me. And we'll explain what that red line means in a moment there. So here we have Keith's priority subscales. You notice that Keith and I share almost an identical dot placement, very strongly inclined SI styles, but Keith has an additional priority of action. And when we look at our bar graph here, we can see that outside of the 3 typical priorities affiliated with our style, Keith has an extremely strong score on the action priority. And again, we can have very similar dot placements, but wildly different priority scores because they are 2 separate sets of questions here. You may be asking, okay, Keith got a very strong score on the action priority here, and that's why he got that additional priority we can see on his map. What determines whether or not someone gets an additional priority? And that is this line here. It's the agreeance in the 78th percentile, or a 78% score or more in the affirmative for a different priority there. So because Keith's action score got above that red line, we can see that that additional priority presents in his profile there. We very quickly go back to mine. None of my other priorities reach that threshold. Therefore, I do not have that additional priority. Very important to emphasize, it is no better or worse to have 3, 4, or even 5 priorities. It simply reflects how your learner has answered those questions and where they tend to focus their time and energy in the workplace. Again, a difference, not better or worse. Very important to keep that in mind. Very good. So, as I mentioned, incredibly powerful tool that you can use to give that additional level of context and build confidence in your learners. But it's very important to carve out that extra time to explain to your learners how to actually read the contents of the report. Don't just leave them to sort of fend for their own devices there. Take the extra time, explain how to read it, and I guarantee there's going to be a great level of confidence or additional context that your learners can achieve by reading that report there. Simon, I do see your hand there. I'm very sorry. I promised to take questions at the end. Just keep that one in mind, write it down somewhere, and I will field that one at the end. I do promise that one, but thank you for raising your hand there. Okay. So moving on now to maintaining engagement. So we want to focus here on how you can maintain the engagement of your learners. First, I really want to speak about the different features that are available in Catalyst that you can use and make the most of, and then also speak briefly about how I reframe one of the activities in the facilitation kit, specifically the motivators and stresses exercise. Let's have a quick look at some of these Catalyst features here. So, maintaining learner attention and engagement can be one of the biggest challenges that we face as facilitators. And a big reason for that is not everyone learns in the same way. I like to keep Neil Fleming's VARK or VARK framework in mind when I'm thinking about designing my workshops. And I try to ensure that I hit all four of those modalities when I'm setting up pre-work, thinking about activities during the session, or even looking at setting follow-up activities after the workshop's already been completed. For those that aren't familiar with this VARK or VARK framework, it essentially suggests that there are four preferences for how your learners will process and retain new information. And the good news is Catalyst has a wealth of features that can accommodate all four of those modalities. Let's have a look. So our first one, the V or visual learner. So these people process information by watching. And Catalyst supports these type of learners through the vast video materials library. So things like In Their Own Words or Beyond Your Comfort Zone has these videos of actors portraying and personifying the DiSC style. So In Their Own Words is part of the workplace component of Catalyst, Beyond Your Comfort Zone, the Agile EQ profile. And what this does, it shows those actors portraying the different ways that the different styles show up, come to work, react in different scenarios to really get that visual component of understanding what those different profiles or the different styles may look like in a day-to-day environment. And then, of course, Discology offers heaps of great introductory videos with graphics and different concepts of the DiSC model, but presented in that visual way. So visual learners, you're sorted in that sense. Our A or auditory learners. So these learners learn and retain information by listening and hearing information. Catalyst has the Your Style podcast as part of the front page or the Learn About Your Style component of Catalyst there. Fantastic resource, very in-depth, about an hour's length, and there's one for each of the 12 unique DiSC styles. They're all narrated by Dr. Mark Scullard, one of our heads of development here at Wiley, and a really useful pre-work exercise to set for your learners if you're using Catalyst before they come to the session. It gives that great background information about their own style. Really useful for our auditory learners. And R or read-write learners. Of course, the profiles and the reports are available for them. And these people learn and retain information by reading text. Of course, they can generate their own PDF copies of their profiles and print them out if they prefer to have that hard copy in front of them. Or, of course, Catalyst has that very natural, almost website design layout for them to scroll through and read about their profiles and read about the styles in that manner. And then finally, our K or kinesthetic learners. So these learners learn by getting hands-on, trying things out, seeing what works and what doesn't, and building that knowledge from experience. Thankfully, Catalyst has a wealth of different ways for them to get tangible action plans or strategies to try out in the real world, see what is actually going to be effective for them, and then learn from those experiences. Work smart, big focus on action plans, and also build better relationships and develop your EQ gives tangible strategies of things that people can try out and really get familiar with and see what is going to be most effective for them. So again, prime example here, you just want to try and focus, are you capturing as many different learning modes as possible when you're preparing your sessions? Knowing that you can't please everyone all of the time, but just being conscious of mixing up some of those different modalities. What can you introduce in your sessions to make sure as many different learning styles are engaged as possible? Really important. Some recommendations for your consideration there on the screen. Okay, moving on to reframing this exercise here. Now, one of my favorite parts of the workplace profile is the motivators and stressors page. Right? It really personifies the style and gives people that understanding of what it's like to be, a day in the life of those different styles around the disc. Having said that, this term stress can carry a certain negative connotation in some learners. I understand the reason to be. It can sometimes be associated with an inability to complete a task or deliver certain results. And of course, it can also elicit a sense of vulnerability. Right? It sends that concept of that's a stressor, I'm not able to do that. Therefore, a learner may want to reject that premise because it does eventually carry that sense of vulnerability and not being able to complete a task. That's not the case. But again, the wording can get a little bit challenging. It can get misconstrued. And that's why I like to reframe these two words when we're doing this activity. When my learners are reading about their motivators, I want them to frame it as these are things that give me energy throughout the workday. And when they're reading about their stresses, these are things that are going to drain my energy throughout the workday. The most important thing to really focus on is that everyone is going to be capable of doing everything listed on their stressor list. Right? You can all do the things that are listed there. It's just going to take a little bit more energy from you sometimes, and that is okay. Because again, we're all going to bring our own strengths and challenges to the workplace and our team when we show up there. So it's really important to emphasize that yes, we're looking at some differences and preferences, but again, we're not reflecting anyone's ability to do their job or reflecting or limiting what they can achieve because of their disc style, not what the tool is looking at. In terms of then doing a bit of a group debrief for this discussion, I essentially get my learners to share a motivator and a stressor that really resonates with them. And what I like to prime them before we start hearing from our teammates is to listen out for some similarities within their responses there. So I often find that some learners will share a common task, right? It'll be the same thing. But for one learner, it's going to be on their motivator list, something that really gives them energy. For another learner, it might be on their stressor list. And that really leads to these aha light bulb moments, those little nuanced differences that we see within our team members. Some things come really naturally to people and they can do them all day without any sort of missing of a beat. Others, that's going to take a little bit more energy from them. And being cognizant of those differences, incredibly valuable in having those group discussions there. So another great way to maintain that engagement in your learners, just simply reframing one of those exercises. You're still using all the same concepts. You're just making a minor change in the verbiage or the words that you're using. Can make all the difference. Okay, coming through now to our third component here, keeping DiSC alive. This, again, is one of the most important aspects of being a facilitator, talking a lot about importance and the different things that we need to do. But keeping that momentum after your session is finished is really going to be integral and a great measure for your success. The two strategies that I'm going to share with you today is one, being comfortable using the compare to a colleague part of Catalyst during your session. And you can do this in place of your traditional comparison report activity if you use that one on a regular basis. And then two, this idea of finding your champion, right? Engaging the leaders or the organizers that help you prepare and deliver this particular DiSC session and knowing how you can support them to, as the title suggests, keep DiSC alive beyond the session, right? When you're not in the room or you're not in the Teams call, who's going to be your champion to keep on pushing these ideas and using the right verbiage to make sure that DiSC stays in the forefront of your learners' minds? Let's start with our compare to a colleague section, shall we? So I'm sure a good number of you have used the free Everything DiSC comparison report before. It essentially would allow you to pair up your learners and generate a set of continua that outlines some of the strongest similarities and differences between those two using their DiSC data. Now, traditionally, these booklets would have been printed out. Your learners would have been sat in pairs next to one another, and they would progress through the booklets, reviewing the information, looking at the continua, and discussing how having that information about the other person would benefit their working relationship. Really powerful tool, but the problem would always stem from this idea of the report being then used and then put away, stored on a shelf, put in a drawer, there to gather dust, never to be looked at again. Right? The learners would very rarely revisit this information, and if they did, it would only be for the same pairings they already did in that workshop, unless they reached out and asked you to generate a new set of reports. That was the main hurdle there. Catalyst fixes this issue because it puts the power back in the hands of the learner, but it allows them to run these comparison reports on demand with their team members inside of the Catalyst platform and encourages that revisiting of the platform, keeping that tool alive. Now, I still run 90% of my face-to-face sessions as unplugged. So that means no computers, no laptops, no digital distraction. We're all present in the room together. But I save this comparison report activity towards the end of my session. And this is where I invite my learners to get their laptops or their phones out and sign into Catalyst, right? This is how they would complete this comparison activity. The effect here is twofold. One, they get to see how to access their comparison reports with any of their team members, because that's how we've set them up on Catalyst. But it also gets them using this Catalyst platform and shows them the return value of coming back to the Catalyst platform and all the tools that are available to them. Because I guarantee you can't cover them all during your session. There's just not enough time. So in terms of guiding them through this process, you have two options. You can either sign into your own Catalyst, share your screen and guide them through a bit of a live demonstration, or you can share screenshots on your slide deck, a little bit like I'm doing here. So here's a bit of an example. I would show them how to navigate to the Your Colleagues section and emphasize the excitement that they can come back and see their teammates' styles and do these comparisons, before team meetings or before projects. It's there for them to use and encourage them to do so. We then show, okay, you click on one of your teammates' tiles. This is, Pammy in my example here. You guide them through what information is available to them. Highlight that I cannot, in my example here, I cannot read Pammy's style story. That's only for her eyes. But what I can see is what Pam cares about, when I should pull her in, what things may stress her out, right? I get to see a side-by-side of our DiSC maps, and I ultimately get to have a look at our tendencies side-by-side as well. So it's this great comparison data that's available to the learner, but you still have that aspect that's only available for them. That style story is just for the learner, for them to read and interpret there on their own. But this comparison data, incredibly valuable for Pam and I to understand how we can be most effective at work. So I'd set questions, encourage them to read through each continua and ask them, how does having this understanding about their partner's tendencies help them be more effective in their working relationships together, right? How does having this information benefit them and how they come to work each day? And ultimately, your learners are far more likely to return to Catalyst and use all the amazing tools available to them if you do a live demonstration during your session. Right? All well and good, we have limited time here, but I guarantee you if you can get these learners to try using Catalyst while you're all there in that session, it's going to be more likely that they're going to return to the tool and really get the most out, which ultimately is at the end of the day what we all want to do. We want to see our learners succeed. Catalyst is one of the tools that they can use to do that. Finally, we want to come back to this idea of finding your champion. So we all know we're not always going to be there to encourage our learners to make use of what they've learned in our session, which is why it's so important to have someone in your corner, so to speak, to champion the idea of DiSC on your behalf when you're not there in the room. So I'm talking team leaders, managers, P&C professionals. These are all likely going to be your prime targets for identifying your DiSC champion. I all know that everyone has very busy schedules and it is all too easy for us to fall back into our usual habits. But that's why we want to make it as easy as possible for your champion to keep using those DiSC terminologies, bringing DiSC into the regular day-to-day fold of things in terms of how the team interacts, how you're preparing for projects, all that kind of fun stuff, making sure that they're ready to keep on echoing those ideas and those strategies. And as I said, making it easy for them to do so. So very easy way to do this is to, one, regularly check in with them so then you can understand, what's working post-session, what are some of the pain points or challenges that the team is experiencing, and also if there's any other needs that need to be addressed as part of that next activity, the next workshop, and how you're going to support the team moving forward. As a little bit of an easier introductory step as well, you can share some DiSC-focused questions with that manager or team leader that they can then bring up in the next team meeting. You can think about this a little bit like a soft launch for the conversation start as part of Catalyst. Rather than diving in and being very regimented and saying, come to this particular part of Catalyst before each team meeting, this is just that little bit more accessible. You give them these questions that you can then share, or they can share rather, in that team environment. Get them thinking about DiSC in that context. I've got a couple examples of some questions that you can share with that team leader here. And again, it's all about coming back and reframing that idea of DiSC into the everyday form of work. You'll notice that not all questions on this page directly reference DiSC, but they do encourage a certain level of self-reflection, which ultimately is going to be one of the most important parts of using the tool, looking inwards and then adjusting our reactions to different scenarios as needed. So on the left-hand side here, we do not mention the word DiSC at all, but it focuses on that self-reflection piece. What strengths do I bring to the team? What are some of my accomplishments? What are the wins, right? What experiences do I have collaborating with my teammates that worked really well? Find the really strong positive, what's working really strongly. And on the right-hand side, we are directly referencing DiSC, right? So what's one thing people might not expect from you knowing your DiSC style? What's that nuanced part that sits you outside of just being, only listed as your DiSC style? What's that extra nuance there? What's something about your DiSC style that you'd like your team to be cognizant of? What do you want to remind people about knowing about your DiSC style? And then an example of how you've considered someone else's DiSC style when communicating. Like bringing back their knowledge, what they've learned in your session, and how they're applying it in the day-to-day. Again, it's these small, minor little things you can do to support your champion to really encourage them to keep using DiSC and keeping it in the forefront of your learners far beyond that workshop that you delivered, keeping it alive, so to speak. Now, I know that is a lot of information that I just presented to you in the last 35 minutes there. So I want to have a quick session recap. So 3 main areas we focused on today. Building confidence in the tool, right? So focusing on ways you can quell any anxiety or apprehension in your learners before they take the assessment. Explain how the tool works, share the research if needed, and be comfortable sharing examples or even better yet, your own profile. Show them there's not going to be any deep, dark secret revealed here, and it's certainly to their benefit, not to their detriment. Sharing the supplemental report with your learners. If you can carve out those 10 minutes to explain how to read the report, I would always encourage you to share with everyone. Even if your learners are not questioning or not really raising any concerns about what they're reading in their report, share that supplemental report with them. It's only going to add more context, greater levels of confidence about the tool and how it works. Maintaining engagement, right? So being cognizant of the different learning styles that are going to be in that workshop or that virtual classroom with you. So you can try and address and cover as many areas as possible, keep all our learners engaged for as long as possible. And again, we use that VARK or VARK method. You can look at Catalyst and I guarantee you'll find great engaging content that is going to tailor to all of those different learner types there. And then again, reframing motivators and stresses, that's one example. If you have other certain activities or topics that maybe some learners are getting caught up on the verbiage, make that minor change, right? You're not changing how the tool is delivered or how the activity works. You're just changing a little bit of the verbiage, of the words, how it's described to make it a bit more accessible. Would always encourage you to do. And then finally, a big focus on keeping DiSC alive. Encourage the use of Catalyst in your sessions, even your unplugged ones, because that's going to help them revisit the session after the fact, and really focusing on finding your champion. They're going to help you and help your learners keep revisiting the DiSC tool and really work it into their everyday so they can maximize the benefits of the Catalyst platform and also the learnings that you shared with them during that session there. So that's in a nutshell, my top tips and tricks for facilitators using Everything DiSC, especially in the modern day with Catalyst. Thank you all for coming to today's webinar. As mentioned, any further questions, feel free to reach out to our support inbox. Even if it's a facilitation question, the support team will flick it over to me. More than happy to field any questions from the field that you might come across. That's what we're here for. Other than that, I hope everyone has a fantastic rest of their Tuesday. And yes, all the best for all the future DiSC sessions you'll be facilitating. I'm sure you'll all do very well. Thanks, everyone.